Hi, everybody. I'm Raina Nielsen from Blue Cypress Books, and I'm here to welcome you to Book Banter. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be talking this evening to one of my favorite local authors, Bethany Mangle. I first fell in love with her when she wrote Prepped. I received this arc like months before the book came out, and I read it and loved it. I was like, oh my gosh, she lives here part-time. Let's reach out. So we did. And then she came out with the second book, All the Right Reasons, which I also loved. And now we are here to celebrate her third book, Conditions of a Heart. It is the perfect third. They get better and better and better with every book that she puts out. So I am super excited to talk to Bethany this evening. If you have any questions at all through the event for Bethany or for myself, type them in the comments below and we will answer them during the event. So without further ado, hi, Bethany.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Well, thank you for joining me. Thanks for writing another book. Thanks for all of the things.
I know, now it's like, oh man, now there's pressure if they got to get better every time, like the fourth one. I don't know.
Oh, you know what? I feel like if there's an author, for me, when there's an author that I love, like I love falling deeper into like all of it. Like they all come together and I can see like similarities, even though they're completely, this is not a series. They're totally three separate standalone books, but like knowing you and knowing the books, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. That sounds like something Bethany would say. Something, because you're saying like your characters, they come through, like you come through in your characters so much. I love it. This one though, from reading your the blurb on it and some things that you've said about it, I feel like this one might be, is this one an important one? It feels important.
Yeah. I kind of wrote this for myself, honestly, more than I really had like a plan to accomplish anything else. Like sometimes I'll set out and say, oh, this story is just like, it's just fun. It's funny. And I just am going to write it because I'm excited to see like kind of what shenanigans people are going to get into, like, with All the Right Reasons. This one, follows a disabled teenager who has the same condition I do. And, she feels like she can't, reveal who she really is at school or to her ex-boyfriend or even her closest friends. And, when everything kind of goes wrong, as, things tend to do in books, she kind of starts having to re-envision who she is. And I feel like that's a process that you do go through when you're disabled and you suddenly have this, something else to work through, like in terms of your identity and how you feel about it. And there's a lot of grieving. And then you also have to work through how society sees you, which can range from, oh, okay, this person understands what I'm going through on some level, to this person is gross. Please stop harassing me in a parking lot.
Yeah. The sort of, is it catching idea? Like this sort of like, it's not, is it catching, but it is the gross, like what is, okay, so bye, this sort of like, like sometimes even just like trying to be polite, but like you can feel that there's this, all of a sudden this like weight and this like, what is it, like a tractor beam, have as like of pulling them going, okay, like they have to, like they have.
I'm just gonna fade into the distance here, putting borders between us as much as possible.
I hope she doesn't notice. Okay, I have to go. Yeah. In this book, one of the things that like continually struck me, especially in the first part of it, was that there was almost nobody that she told. Nobody knew who she really was. Like, and when I found out, like the ex-boyfriend, they'd been together for so long. Like, I mean, in reality, like to me, there wasn't like a super short. They had been together for a while, and I was like, okay, there's all of these characters, and I honestly just kept feeling like bad for her. Like it was like, oh well, there's gonna be a best friend. There's gonna be a thing. There's gonna be this. I was like, there was all these people that just weren't, and she didn't feel comfortable with, and that kind of like, it both endeared me to her and sort of like broke my heart about that, the beginning of it, as I'm learning all that stuff. But it was so good. It was good. It's good. I mean, breaking my heart in a great way. Thank you.
I mean, I did see, someone commenting on like, hey, this book starts in the middle. And I'm like, yes. And that was like super deliberate and also very difficult, because I feel like there are a lot of stories that you watch people fall in love on the page. And I wanted to go a little bit like kind of deeper than that, where you have people who have been together for so long that there's like all that extra drama and like tension and baggage, because it's like, oh no, I'm forced to see you because we go to the same school, but also please don't look at me or be around me or talk to me or anything. And just kind of capturing that feeling of, kind of having to see each other on a day-to-day basis, and what that kind of does when you're a teenager and you feel like, obviously, Brynn is still in love with, Oliver from a distance, but thinks that he's kind of just like unattainable, with her life and her health and everything like that. So I really felt like that was something I couldn't do if they were falling in love on the page. It just felt like it's too fast.
Well, and that's only a part of what this story is too. So you don't, it allows you to drop in the way that it is, the way that she sees that, the only from her perspective, you're in that way because you get to see the bits that affect her and have affected her and stuck with her, I guess, instead of like you getting all the good and bad as you go along. So I think that served the story very well that way. So I don't know what they're talking. You are, but it's great. It was a good idea. 2 thumbs up.
Well, it's also like everybody thinks that they are the main character, and obviously books have a main character. That's how we go through life. Like, obviously, like everyone is self-centered to some regard because that's the only way that you perceive like the universe. Right. So, but in this book, I really felt like, yeah, I can really see how it's like you feel, or rather she feels like she is always right throughout the whole thing. But as the reader, you're like, I feel like maybe you're not like listening to everybody. Like your dad makes some good points and she's just like, no, I've got this. I don't need any of you. And, it's kind of working through that process of like disentangling from the idea that you have to do it all yourself, or that you know everything, or that you are the main character, because even though you feel that way or see the world that way a lot of the time, like it's not literally true.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like, I guess, pulling from my teenage experience, is that even if you think there's anything wrong with you, there's something someone might see, it's like you have to try even harder, like that normal people are doing it all right. So in order for me to fit in with them, I have to be doing everything right. And that's obviously completely not true in any way, but especially as a teenager, because your life is so insular, like, you're only seeing it very much from your own point of view. And then you're masking something that is even more so going to make you feel like you have to be perfect. You have to be right. Whatever it is you're doing has to be the right thing to do, because if it's not, then everyone's going to know everything. Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also, it bothers me a lot of the time when we talk about teenagers and we talk about kids in high school as like, oh, well, you have no responsibilities, like you, blah, blah, blah. And then I think back to when I was actually experiencing that time, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, they want you to figure out your entire life in this very short span of time and make all these decisions that are going to affect your future forever. Mm-hmm. And that's a ton of pressure. There's no other point in your life that you're under that much pressure with so little experience. And that was something else that I really wanted to put into this book, of like deciding if you want to go to college, and if you do, what do you want to study? Where do you want to live? How are you going to get the money? Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? There's all these like major questions. And I feel like they kind of get steamrolled by people just kind of like minimizing how stressful that can be, when you're like, basically still figuring out where you are in the world and what you want. And,
Well, actually, to this point, my son, who is 17 now, said something just the other day, and it made me step back and think for a minute, because he did say, because we were talking about college. We're filling out financial aid. Should he, get a job? Some people think he should. Some people think he shouldn't. But like, we're talking about all of these major things, and he said, like, okay, it's like 6 months ago you were taking care of it all, and now all of a sudden you don't want to take care of it all. And I went, oh, I see what you're saying. Like, that's not what I mean at all when I say, hey, why don't you go do some research? Why don't you look, to see maybe if the coffee shop's hiring? But literally 6 months to a year or so ago, I would have been like, hey, did you know the coffee shop's hiring? Like, I would have done that work. It was smaller things, but I would have done all that researchy legwork for him and more presented it. And all of a sudden the world's hitting him, and it's a lot. And it made me think about it, just exactly like what you were saying. Another thing with college that we're experiencing right now too is everyone says they're asking you, from the time you're old enough to understand professions, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? And then all of a sudden, everyone is telling him he doesn't have to declare a major. It's okay. You can declare a major in a year or so. And I'm like, you're right. That's confusing.
Yeah, it's a lot of conflicting like advice, and you see people making different choices from what you thought was right, and then you're like, wait, am I doing life wrong? Like, what am I supposed to do? Help me. And a lot of the people who are giving you advice are like teachers who have not been in that situation for over a decade or more. So it's like, how accurate then is your advice if, you went to college when you sent in a paper application, and now, I need help with, the Common App or whatever they're using now.
Right. Well, and I would say the applications for college now they have the ability to have so many more questions and so many more drop-down menus and stuff. Like if an application needed to only be like 2 pages before, and now it could just keep scrolling. So that's a very interesting thing that's coming up as well. You in the book, well, with books, we get to see resolution in a way that we don't get to see it in real life. And it was kind of refreshing to be reading through some of this same space and age where my son is, and having it like come together. It gives me hope. It's nice to just like get that refresh and be like, it's gonna be fine no matter what, like things come together one way or the other. And I appreciate that, just because my life of what I'm going through at the moment. Must off the book. It almost hit the ground. I do have a question though, since I've been here like talking to you for all 3 of these books. I'm really interested in what the difference between writing the first one and the third one, like the process difference. Is it faster? Is it slower? What has changed? Like, what have you learned? I guess. Give me a brief from the first to the third.
Okay, so it's all chaos. But when I first wrote Prepped, the difference was that, I had a full and complete manuscript by the time we sold the book. And so it's like I already had a lot of the bones in place, a lot of it already, the major plot lines stayed the same. The second book was kind of in the middle, where it's like I had a skinnier draft, and I knew it needed to be kind of fleshed out, but we did that, with my editor after it was already sold. And then this one, I had like a section of it written, and then like an idea of like going forward. So that was my first experience being on a deadline. 0 of 10, do not recommend, because like if you're like me anyway, because that was just putting a time limit on something, even if it's like you know, it was something really basic, like you have to drink a glass of water by 9 o'clock tonight, I'll just panic. Like I can't handle it. So that was a learning experience in being able to get everything together by a certain point and finish something without really having an outline for exactly how it was supposed to go, because I was all over the place with this one, trying to figure out how it was going to resolve, like everything, major plot lines. And so that was an interesting experience. Interesting doesn't mean good. So I don't know that I'll necessarily do that again. Like I will say I'm working on another project, and that actually has an outline, and it is the first time I've ever made a complete outline like that. So it's like I'm kind of learning my lesson a little bit in terms of being what they call, you know, a pantser, where I am just, there's just no structure. I'm writing out a chronological order. I have no idea like who anyone is or what they want. And I'm just, you know, kind of winging it from page 1 all the way to page 78 and then coming back to page 2. You know, so it's been a learning experience, and I try not to give advice in that regard, because what works for me is not going to work for anybody else, period. Like when I see these blanket statements about like, you should or should not do this, I'm like, no, that's anybody who's giving like blanket advice like that. It's like, that's just your perspective.
Yeah. What works for you, which for me, it's great because I get to hear a lot of people tell me what works for them, and then you can pick and choose. Then you can go, okay, this and this and this, that all sounds good. Let me try that. It's great.
Yeah, and it is nice too when you want a different method, because whatever you normally do isn't working. Like I was fine for the first 2 books to just lurk in chaos, and then the third one is when I went, oh no, I definitely need to figure out something. As I, start trying to figure out other projects and things like that. And so having friends who have different methods, you can say, well, what do you do? Like my one friend disgusts me because she'll have like a 7,000 word outline, and I have like a sticky note with like 4 bullet points, and 3 of them are crossed out. And one of them is buy Cheetos or something. It's like, none of it is useful to me. So when someone has such a structured process, I'm like, wow, that is awesome. Like, I wish I could do that, but I can't. So I'm just going to take like a couple of little like pieces of advice and then apply those and see if they work. And then maybe eventually I'll build up to the point that I have a more structured, process.
Well, and I imagine that the deadline makes a big difference. Like if there's no end date, then you can pants it as long as you need to get to the story you want. But if somebody's like, so where is that story? How you doing? How's it going? I love that question. Like, oh, how's the fill-in project name here going? Okay, I know what you mean. You mean, is it going to be done by that date you said? That's what you're trying to say, but you're trying to be polite about it. But yeah, the outlines and the research or the whatever it is that you need to do make a big difference when you're on that deadline. Which, back to school, they tried to convince us of that back in the day.
I'm like, no, it's motivating. I'm like, no, it's not. Just spend more time crying.
Well, and I remember in school, they, at least for me, they would tell me like, this is, it's part of the process and you need to do it and it helps you out and whatever. And I always felt like it was busy work. Like I didn't, a lot of those prep things, I still in my, I know everything that's right brain, thought it was busy. It's like a worksheet to fill my time. But if I don't have to do it, I don't have to do it. And so then I would half do it to get the credit, that you need, and learned, as you're saying, quite a bit later that, hey, everything comes together a little easier if I actually do fill out those index cards.
Well, it's also like the project, there's, for anyone who hasn't read it yet, there is a project in the book where they're kind of assigned some aspects of their life, but then they also have to fill in like, what's your occupation? Okay, where do you live? How much money you make? How are you going to coordinate bills with like a fake roommate, etc. And that is actually based on a real project that I did in high school. So I remember reading a draft at the time and thinking, like, is this realistic? I feel like this sounds made up. I'm like, that's ridiculous, because I really did this. I had to get magazines and cut out a car. I remember like going through these magazines and saying, like, none of these are in my budget. I'm never going to be able to get a car. And nowadays it's like, I have to obviously modernize a lot of stuff. And luckily, like I said, I have some, I have nieces and a nephew who are, younger than me by quite a bit. And my friends have, kids who are still in school. And so sometimes, like, I will just eavesdrop on them and like, so what are the kids doing these days? Because we know that, the days of the magazine collages are, those are probably not a thing anymore. And so I do try to update a little bit by, kind of figuring out what's kind of a realistic kind of high school experience. But that is very challenging because, it varies so much.
It does. I mean, my son in, like, I think 5th grade was making Google presentations, which would be basically the cut out a picture of a car and stick it to the poster board idea, because that's what he was doing. He's gathering things and then making it into a Google presentation. So, and I didn't even know Google had Google presentation. And he's like, I have to make one of these. And I was like, cool, let's figure out what that is. I don't know what we're doing. So yes, everything has changed. And also, I don't even know exactly where you'd go to buy all the magazines at this point.
No, I don't either. And then also just like, the use of like smart boards and things like that. But it's also like the day-to-day structures, like how do people approach sports? Like what are, what are the dances like nowadays? What events are important? Issues like that, because it really does affect, kind of how you experience school. And I do want to get that right to some extent, but it's also difficult because, I'm drawing off of very old memories, and that's not really going to be relevant anymore. So.
Right. But so that's when the nieces and nephews come into play.
We're just like the weirdest Google searches ever. Like, I know that the joke is like, how do you hide a dead body? Like for writers. But I'm Googling like what shoes are cool if you're 13? Like,
your Google thinks you're an insecure 13-year-old.
I know. I'm like, what's most popular on Spotify today? Okay, this seems like something I'd listen to if I was like 17. Like,
oh, that's so true. And even then, like, it's hard to, like, I second guess stuff. Like, why do we care about these shorts? I don't know why we care about these. We care about these? Okay. We care. I care. I'm in.
You're like, I'm committed to this. I'm ready.
Yeah. Well, and then I wonder too, okay, so not only do you have that aspect where you're doing all this research and trying to figure out what's hip with the kids, but then you're like, would my character like be into this thing? Because not every kid is into this thing, right? So how do you, I mean, is that difficult, I guess, separating it just from the research, and then like how do you pick out what your characters would do in this world?
I try to keep them like as their own little people, and so you just think about like, okay, well, what are their interests? If based on these main interests, if they had to pick a, whatever, what would it be? And just kind of thinking through like all these kind of little minor details that fill out their lives. And so it's a lot of it is just intuition, in terms of, kind of figuring out when is this me talking. I cheated a little bit in Conditions of the Heart because, my main character, like I said, has the same condition I do, but so does her dad because it's genetic. And since he's older, I just made him have all the same corny interests that I do. So he's the one who's like sitting on the couch playing Pokemon and making these references. And there are some times that he will say something and she's like thinking, she's like, I don't get what he's talking about. And that's kind of me coming in because it's like, I wanted to make a joke, but I realized it's way too old. It's not going to, land if it comes from her. So I'll just cheat and blame it on dad.
I love that.
So
That's brilliant. Then you get to work it in. And then, you get the teenager, which I can attest to, going like, oh God, dad, why? No, you are embarrassing. But my son doesn't say that, but he
but he thinks it.
he exudes it with all of his being. He just like Care Bear stares it out at me. But he doesn't say it, which is very, very nice of him. So how long did it take you to write this one? You said you were on a deadline, but like,
I feel like it took probably grand total like 6 months.
Oh, that's fast. That's kind of fast.
Well, it was also like, it was complicated because I felt like my poor editor, I felt like every other day I'm emailing my editor, like, I'm sorry, I'm under an avalanche of calamity. Because it was like at the turn of last year when I was really finishing all this up, I'm like, okay, I've got this. I am going to put together a great draft and everything is going to go seamlessly. And then it was like, hey, you need this really intensive major surgery and your dog is going to die. And then your grandmother's going to die too. And it's all going to happen in the span of like 3 weeks. So I am just like this like sad, like puddle person, trying to put this book together and sort of point, I luckily, like, my editor is amazing and my agent is amazing. And I just kind of texted them and was like, I can't do it. Help me. And they helped, they kind of jumped in and said, hey, this is where, it's a little bit weak, or, hey, we think that you could, put this here, and then kind of, walk me through some of those bigger changes so that it made a little bit more sense and it came together better at the end. Because, all of my endings are, because I'm a pantser, it's like I get halfway and then I'm just like, oh, no, I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's why, for example, like with Prepped, where there's like kind of a twist, like more of a surprise in the middle. We're like, man, I didn't see that coming. I'm like, me either.
It was also a surprise to me.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, I could fit this in here. And because I there's no way that I telegraphed this in advance in any way with any hints, because just thought of it right now.
I was like, that no one's gonna see it. Okay, yep. So have you ever done something like similar like that? Like something happens in the story that you didn't quite see coming, but then you need to go back and put things in, like sprinkle in, because sometimes it's great for it to be certain things like a surprise, but other things you're like, wait a minute, I guess I should have told somebody a little bit earlier.
Yep. It's, it's the whole, I always think about it as a sweater, right? The kind of like you're pulling the string and it's unraveling. And then, it's like, oh, you create all of these holes and you don't realize it. And one of the things that I do is, and I don't know why this works, it's every time I'm done a draft, I read it 3 times. I read it on my laptop and then I print it and feel bad about it because it's a lot of paper. And I read it on the paper and then I read it out loud. And every time I do a format change like that, I will find something different or wrong. And I'm like, when you have to say it out loud, you're like, why did I ever think that was, and sometimes it makes it through like many people before I find it. And I'm like, thank you. That makes me feel better. Like at one point in All the Right Reasons, I realized I made this poor woman change her shoes like 6 times in a scene. Nobody noticed. And it's just like, why did I do that? So I had to keep going back and kind of saying like, okay, we need to obviously delete that unless, she's an octopus. And, and then kind of catching all those little holes. And regardless, no matter how many times I look at it, I will, pick up the final copy of the book. And no matter which page I open, I'm like, somewhere in here, there's going to be a mistake in the next like 10 pages. I just know it. And I'll go through and go, oh man, I did leave that in there. And then I'm like, nobody's going to notice this. That's, I've got to stop panicking about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things probably you see because but it's fine. Like, I can't think of a single thing in all these books where I was like, what? Like, like that I would notice at all. That's just something that you.
Well, it also makes me a more forgiving reader. Or like in movies, every
yeah.
once in a while, I will find like just the most glaring, just plot hole, and I'm like, and my poor husband, I'm like, pause this. Like, no, because if they did that, then this would happen. No, that can't. And he's like, and so, but it makes me more forgiving because then I just go, oh, okay. I'm like, honestly, it's probably one of those things they just never thought about. And, I do that all the time. So, I'm not going to be judgmental when somebody else, puts out a story and just totally doesn't realize that, there was this really big, hole somewhere.
Yeah. And you're right. It isn't, it takes like, you can read it and reread it and read it and reread it. And it just doesn't stick out. It just doesn't stick out to you. But I love the idea that you read it like you do those same 3 ways. Yeah. How did you just come up with that? Did you stumble upon that? When did that start?
Well, it started actually like a long time ago, like way before Prepped. It was one of my ways of looking for mistakes was to just print it and read it, because this way, like, I could just take like the printed copy with me and just go somewhere else. Right. I used to just function better if I went to a completely different place, and that really hasn't, it works sometimes, but it's not as important to me as it used to be. But the reason that I always say to read things out loud is, when you have dialogue, it'll look fine on paper, and then you realize that the cadence isn't right when you actually have to say it.
Yeah.
And we had, like, as people, like, we just naturally have an ear for that, or like every once in a while you get forced to say something strange because it has like, a company name in it or something. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of like, like it's difficult to pronounce or put the words together. And that's kind of why I go through it in that format, so that I can catch that cadence in the dialogue, or, anywhere that somebody reading in their head is going to, kind of stumble over the words because it doesn't make sense or the flow isn't right.
Yeah, I've actually, that happens with audiobooks, because I don't notice it if I'm reading the print copy, I'm not hearing it, or I'm not saying it out loud, so I'm not hearing that. But there've been audiobooks I've listened to where I'm like, doesn't sound right. Sometimes I feel like I missed something, and then like I'm like, oh, it's me, right? But if it's something I'm really into and I go back and I listen, I'm like, it's not. It's somehow it just doesn't quite.
Yeah, there's like there's this one syllable half the time that's just a little strange, and it almost sounds like a hiccup in the sentence. It just doesn't sound right. So I feel like reading out loud really kind of smooths out those smaller issues.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the only other kind of strange thing I do is I only listen to one song.
Whoa. What's the song?
For this one, it is it's Lovely, but it's the cover by Lauren Babick. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that the right way.
All right.
But a lot of the time I have 2 or 3 projects that I'm working on. And so if I have like a theme song for each book, I can put that back on, and it's like, okay, like, it's kind of almost like listening to the intro track of like a TV show. Like, it gets you in the mood. Like, if you're a weirdo like me, like, Game of Thrones, I'm like, drumming along to it. Like, it's just something that's very catchy, but it also kind of like tells your brain like, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. And somehow that works for me. And I tune it out half the time, but it does kind of help me get back into the right tone and the right story.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Okay, wait. How did Lovely become the song for this book?
One of my friends was playing it, and I'm like, this is a cool cover. I like this. Okay. And then I started listening more to the words, and I was like, oh, I should start writing. And then, I kind of just, started drafting, and I'm like, I think this is a song. I feel like I could listen to this 2,000 times, which is funny because like when I wrote Prepped, it was to a song I don't even like. It just seemed to fit. And so I put it on loop and just kept going. So
there you go.
And that was Paradise by Coldplay for that book. And so it's, yes.
I see that.
I don't have anything against it. It's just like, it's just not usually like my type of music. And somehow, I don't know if I heard it like in a store or online or something.
And then you're just like, that's it. That's the one.
Yep.
I love it. I love that. Well, Bethany, thank you so much for joining me for Book Banter again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm always excited to do this because it's like, you know, it's familiar, and you know,
right?
with the store being local, I mean, that's just great. I'm super excited about that because, you know, there's just something so nice about like your local indie bookstore. It's just like magic. I love it.
Well, thank you very much. We love you too. And y'all, I put a link in the comments for signed copies of Conditions of a Heart. And I'm about to click the button here. And this link will take you to all of Bethany's books on our website. So you can purchase them through our website and you'll get signed copies. And you can give us a call during store hours, or you can come in, of course. And we will have her new book and all of her other books. Yay, you have one too. Ha!
What a coincidence.
What? Well, Bethany, thank you again. And everybody, thank you for watching. And we will see you next time. Bye.